BTS news today. There are stories the world thinks it already knows, moments that fans believe they've decoded through thousands of clips, glances, and live streams. Yet sometimes, the truth hides not in what is said, but in the quiet spaces between two hearts beating in rhythm under the blinding light of fame. For years, whispers have circled around Jimin and Jungkook, two souls from BTS whose chemistry often blurred the line between brotherhood and something far more profound. And now, after months of silence, fragments of a confession have surfaced, echoing through backstage corridors, hotel balconies, and the soft hum of studio nights. The revelation began not with words, but with a song. When Jungkook's latest live ended abruptly in September, his voice trembling, his hand clutching the microphone, fans noticed something different. It wasn't exhaustion, it was emotion. His eyes, usually sparkling with youthful mischief, held a deep stillness that evening. Some people never say what they feel, he murmured before the stream cut off. Those who listened closely swore they heard a soft voice in the background calling his name, Jungkook. It was gentle, familiar, and heartbreakingly intimate. The internet erupted. Theories flooded Weverse, Twitter, and TikTok, dissecting every syllable and movement. But what no one expected was how the truth would unfold. Not through a public statement, but through a hidden letter found by someone inside HYB's own studio complex. According to a source who spoke to Dispatch Korea under anonymity, the letter wasn't meant for anyone to find. It was tucked behind a lyric notebook, sealed in a small envelope marked only with a single word, "For you." Inside, in delicate handwriting unmistakably belonging to Jimin, were the words that would shake Army's collective heart. I didn't know when it started. Maybe it was that night in Los Angeles, when we stayed behind after practice. You were singing softly, and the city lights made you look unreal. I didn't plan to fall for you. But how could I not, Jungkook? Every version of you keeps finding me. Those lines alone ignited a storm online. Fans debated authenticity. Was it truly Jimin's writing? Could it be lyrics from an unreleased song? But insiders close to the duo claimed the emotional tone, the phrasing, and even the way the ink smudged in certain parts matched the way Jimin often wrote during reflective moments. What followed next only added fuel to the mystery. A week after the letter's supposed discovery, Jungkook appeared live again, this time wearing a soft gray hoodie, his hair slightly damp, his voice raw but tender. He played an unreleased melody on guitar, and without introduction, began singing. You called me home when I was running, when silence hurt more than goodbye. You taught me love doesn't need to be spoken. It just lives, quietly, in your eyes. The lyrics were unlike anything fans had heard from him before. They weren't about fame or freedom. They were about intimacy, a fragile connection held in secret. The emotional delivery, paired with the visible tremble in his hands, left viewers shaken. Within minutes, #Jungkook Confession began trending in over 40 countries. Yet, behind the glimmering digital hysteria, something deeper was unfolding in real life. Sources within HYB reportedly confirmed that both Jimin and Jungkook had requested a private creative retreat shortly after the live, a rare move for any BTS member still under an active solo promotion cycle. For 2 weeks, they disappeared from the public eye. No airport photos, no updates, no live appearances, only silence. But silence, as fans have learned, often speaks louder than any statement. When the duo resurfaced in early October, their demeanor had shifted. Jimin appeared at a Chanel event in Seoul wearing an understated black suit, his smile soft but his eyes distant. Jungkook, meanwhile, was seen arriving at HYB late at night, head down, his usual wave replaced by a quiet nod to security. Dispatch photographers noted that his left wrist carried a thin silver bracelet, the very same one Jimin had worn during a performance in Busan months before. Coincidence? Or connection? Industry insiders began whispering of a hidden project, something that the two were developing behind the scenes, not for commercial release, but as a personal expression. One producer, who worked on Jungkook's solo album, described it as a musical letter that might never be released, but it exists. It's real, and it's theirs. Weeks later, on October 29th, another subtle clue surfaced. Jimin posted a single line on Instagram stories, a photo of the moon above Seoul, captioned simply, "You're still my favorite sound." Minutes later, Jungkook posted a story of his own, a blurred shot of the same skyline, with only one word beneath it, always. Fans went wild. Could this be their silent dialogue, their way of acknowledging something that words could never safely carry in public? HYB declined to comment, stating only, "Our artists' private creative expressions are not for public interpretation." But for those who followed their journey since debut, every shared glance, every mirrored movement, every spontaneous laugh felt like another piece of a puzzle that was finally taking shape. People close to both Jimin and Jungkook described their bond as deeper than brotherhood. They have weathered the storms of global fame together, from the uncertain early years in cramped dorms to the relentless scrutiny of international superstardom. They became each other's calm, one staff member revealed. When one of them struggled, the other always knew, even before words were spoken. This connection, invisible yet palpable, reached its most powerful expression during the yet-to-come Busan concert. Observers recalled how, during the encore, Jimin reached out his hand toward Jungkook, a small gesture that many dismissed as choreography. But insiders say it wasn't planned. He looked lost for a moment. The crew member shared, and Jimin just reached for him, like instinct. That's who they are. As days turned into weeks, fragments of their confession began to surface in subtle ways. Interviews, lyrics, even brief mentions during live sessions. In one late-night Weverse Live, Jimin responded to a fan asking about love. Love is when someone knows your silence better than your words. His tone was reflective, and for a moment, it seemed as if he was talking not to ARMY, but to someone specific watching quietly from afar. Then came the Seoul winter. The city turned cold, and BTS members began scattering for their solo endeavors. But Jimin and Jungkook were seen together again, this time in a small studio outside the city. A passerby who worked nearby described hearing soft laughter and piano music late at night, sometimes lasting until dawn. They weren't recording a hit, the witness said. They were recording memories. When Dispatch tried to investigate further, security around the area intensified. Even staff within HYB were reportedly instructed not to disclose details regarding the studio schedule. Something was being protected, not an album, but a truth. By mid-November, whispers of a confession film emerged. The term, vague yet tantalizing, referred to a rumored visual piece created by the two, possibly a short film blending music, poetry, and fragments of real life. The working title? The One We Never Told. Though unconfirmed, a source close to the project hinted that it was a deeply personal narrative about timing, silence, and courage. If this were true, it would mark one of the most intimate collaborations in BTS history, a project born not from corporate strategy, but from something raw, almost sacred, and still, the world waited for clarity. But perhaps, that's the point. Maybe their story was never meant to be defined in clear terms. It's the kind of connection that doesn't seek permission or publicity. It just is. In late-night radio interviews, Jungkook began speaking more openly about authenticity and vulnerability. "You can't hide what's real forever," he said once, his voice low. "Even if you don't say it, the truth finds its way out. In music, in silence, in small gestures." Fans replayed that sentence endlessly, convinced it was his subtle confirmation. Because deep down, everyone could feel it, that behind the rehearsed smiles and practiced professionalism, there existed something unguarded, tender, and utterly human. If the story of Jimin and Jungkook teaches us anything, it's that love in its truest form doesn't always need to be declared. Sometimes, it hides behind glances, songs, and moments stolen from a world that demands perfection. Sometimes, it's not about labels or announcements, but about two souls finding home in each other, even when the world can't understand it. And as Seoul drifts deeper into winter, fans across the world hold on to one last scene that reportedly unfolded in late October. Jimin standing by the Han River in the early hours of morning, hood pulled up, phone pressed to his ear. Witnesses say he smiled softly before whispering something and ending the call. Minutes later, Jungkook posted a short note on Weverse. "Sometimes, love is quiet, but it's still love." The confession, it seems, was never meant for the world, yet somehow, the world heard it anyway. That winter in Busan didn't begin with snow. It began with silence. a silence that carried the weight of all the unspoken things between Jimin and Jungkook. The city's coastline shimmered under muted skies, and the wind from the sea carried the scent of salt and memory. Jimin arrived quietly, his face hidden under a wool cap, hands buried in the pockets of his long gray coat. No entourage, no flashing cameras, just him and the sound of waves against the pier. For years, Busan had been their refuge, their shared origin. It was where they first dreamed, where their names were still unknown, where the future felt infinite and untouched. But this time, the air between them held something else, a truth waiting to be spoken. Jungkook had been there before him. Locals said they saw him earlier that morning at Gwangali Beach, sitting near the water with a notebook on his lap. He wasn't writing lyrics this time. He was writing closure. Or maybe, he was writing a beginning. When they finally met later that evening, it wasn't in a studio or a stage, but at a small rooftop cafe overlooking the harbor. The place was empty, reserved quietly by someone under an alias. Most likely HYB's silent approval of their need for privacy. There was no script, no camera, no audience. Just two people, bound by history and something deeper that refused to fade. For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside seemed to slow, as if giving them permission to finally exist without expectations. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Really looked. The way you only look at someone who's seen every version of you and still stayed. He broke the silence first. "You still write like you used to," he said, nodding at the notebook. His voice was soft, a whisper carried by the cold air. Jungkook smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Some things shouldn't." It wasn't a confession yet. It was a beginning. Fragile, unsure, but real. That night, witnesses from nearby buildings claimed they heard faint laughter echoing from the rooftop. One described it as melancholic, like two people remembering the best and worst of their lives at the same time. Another said they saw them stand close at the railing, watching the sea, shoulders brushing in the wind. Later, Jungkook took a photo, the harbor lights blurred behind Jimin's silhouette. He didn't post it, but days later, fans noticed a similar reflection in Jungkook's own social media post. A shot of city lights mirrored on water, captioned, "Where it all started." Dispatch insiders claimed that the Busan meeting marked a turning point. They needed it, one source said. There were too many rumors, too much noise. This was them, grounding themselves in something only they could understand. When they returned to Seoul, everything felt different. In rehearsals, they no longer avoided each other's eyes. Their energy, always electric, seemed calmer, like a storm that had finally learned to rest. During a behind-the-scenes clip released by HYB weeks later, a brief frame showed Jimin adjusting Jungkook's microphone before a shoot. It was ordinary, something they had done countless times before. But this time, fans noticed the faint smile that flickered between them. It wasn't performative. It was pieced up. By December, rumors about their confession project resurfaced. Anonymous producers hinted that Jimin and Jungkook were finalizing a short visual piece filmed partially in Busan. Leaked details described it as a cinematic diary told through letters, rain, and music. Insiders compared it to a love letter disguised as art. Intimate, symbolic, but raw enough to leave no doubt about who it was meant for. No title was confirmed, but one working name appeared briefly in production documents. To the one who stayed. The project was rumored to include unreleased vocals recorded during their retreat, a duet that, according to one audio engineer, felt too personal to ever release. The lyrics, reportedly written by both, spoke of timing, fear, and silent devotion. One line in particular stood out. "You were the sound that found me when the world went quiet." When fans discovered that phrase hidden in the metadata of Jungkook's Instagram story weeks later, the internet imploded. Threads of analysis emerged within hours. Some argued it was poetic coincidence. Others believed it was a deliberate clue. Still, HYB remained silent. Neither confirmation nor denial, just the echoing space where truth and speculation coexist. That on Christmas Eve, Jungkook went live again. The lights in his room were dim, his hair messy, his tone softer than usual. He greeted fans with a faint smile, guitar resting on his lap. But instead of his usual playlist, he began strumming a melody that no one recognized. Halfway through, He looked down and whispered, almost to himself, "I promised I'd sing this once." Then he began, "I found you in the quiet, where stars forgot to shine. You were there, unspoken, but every word was mine." Fans around the world sat frozen, tears streaming as the chat flooded with disbelief. The tenderness, the ache, the unmistakable depth, it wasn't just a love song. It was a confession hidden in plain sight. Near the end, Jungkook glanced briefly off camera, his expression softening. "Merry Christmas," he said, his smile trembling. Some promises are meant to be kept, even if no one understands them. Minutes later, Jimin uploaded a single Instagram story, a photo of a handwritten note placed beside a burning candle. The note read, "Thank you for keeping it." The timing was too perfect to ignore. Fans called it the quietest confession in K-pop history. As the year turned, Dispatch once again attempted to trace the origins of the rumored film. By January, several staff members confirmed that To the One Who Stayed was completed, but HYB had locked all access under internal archive status. "It may never be released," one said. "Maybe it was never meant for us." But that didn't stop the story from spreading. Fan artists recreated imagined scenes from the alleged short film. Jimin walking through the rain, Jungkook waiting by the sea, two parallel lines converging in silence. It became a phenomenon not because of proof, but because of belief. Even months later, subtle moments continued to surface. During a televised interview, when asked about love, Jungkook paused before answering. "Love," he repeated softly. "It's not about showing. It's about choosing, every day quietly." Jimin, seated beside him, smiled faintly, eyes glistening with unspoken understanding. That moment, replayed endlessly online, became legendary. A single shared glance that said more than any statement ever could. By spring, both artists had resumed their individual projects. Jimin released a reflective solo track titled Fragments, its lyrics circling themes of memory and devotion. One line stood out immediately to fans. "I kept your song in my heartbeat, though the world forgot the tune." Meanwhile, Jungkook was photographed leaving the HYB studio wearing a silver chain around his neck, one that perfectly matched the bracelet fans had linked to Jimin months earlier. No official connection was made. None needed to be. As time moved forward, the story of Jimin and Jungkook transformed, from rumor to revelation, from revelation to legend. It wasn't about whether they were in love in the way people defined love, but about how two souls found safety in a world built on noise and expectation. Perhaps that was their confession all along. Not a grand declaration, but the courage to be real in silence. And still, months later, late at night, a faint melody sometimes drifts from Jungkook's studio, one that fans swear resembles the song from that Christmas Eve live. The words remain the same. "You were there when no one heard me. You stayed when I was gone. If love must hide to live, then let it live in song." Got it. I'll continue seamlessly, in the same emotional English narrative style, expanding toward the full 9,000-word length. By the time winter faded into spring, the story that began in silence had turned into a quiet legend among fans. Seoul had thawed, cherry blossoms softened the air, and the city once again pulsed with the rhythm of new beginnings. But for Jimin and Jungkook, spring brought something else. A final chapter neither of them had planned, yet both knew they had to face. The rumor began when an airline employee leaked a passenger manifest showing two familiar names booked on the same late-night flight to Tokyo. It wasn't unusual for BTS members to travel for work, but what caught everyone's attention was the timing. Both had cleared their schedules for the same week, neither attached to an official event. Within hours, social media exploded with theories. Was it a photo shoot? A secret recording? Or the continuation of To the One Who Stayed, the project that had become the ghost of their confession? When they landed at Haneda, no cameras were waiting. It was almost as if the world had agreed to look away, to give them space. They wore masks and neutral clothes, blending into the quiet of early morning Tokyo, a city that understood how to keep secrets. They checked into a small boutique hotel overlooking the Shinjuku skyline, a place known for its discretion. The owner later described them not as idols, but as two polite young men who seemed to carry too much inside. They stayed mostly in, ordering coffee late at night, Walking the narrow alleyways between neon and shadow. It was there, according to one production assistant, that they filmed the final sequence of their private project, a scene set on a rooftop, with Jimin sitting by a window, writing a letter as the city lights flickered below, and Jungkook's voice narrating over soft piano. The last line of the narration, reportedly written by Jungkook himself, was simple yet devastating. "If I could live this life again, I'd still choose the silence between us, because that's where you loved me most." Those words, though never officially released, spread quietly among insiders. One editor who worked on the footage described it as achingly human, not fan service, not performance, just truth. For 3 days, they filmed from dawn until the city slept. Between takes, they talked about music, about exhaustion, about the weight of always being watched. Jimin, ever the gentle listener, reminded Jungkook of who he was before the world decided what he should be. And Jungkook, with his boundless energy softened by time, told Jimin that he'd found peace in knowing that someone still saw him, not as the idol, but as the boy who once sang under dim practice lights in Busan. Their friendship, or whatever word people wanted to give it, wasn't about labels. It was about survival, about finding warmth when the lights went out. On their last night in Tokyo, they walked along the Sumida River. The air was cool, the water reflecting the city's heartbeat. Jimin carried his camera, the same one he'd used to document tour memories, and snapped a photo of Jungkook looking up at the sky. "You always look at the stars," Jimin said softly, "even when you can't see them." Jungkook smiled. "You always remind me they're still there." That was their final take, not for the film, but for themselves. The quiet before returning to the noise. The next morning, they flew back to Seoul separately, as if to preserve the illusion of distance. Yet fans noticed subtle traces once more: a bracelet, a lyric, a shared post within minutes of each other. Pieces of a story only those who truly paid attention could piece together. By the time summer arrived, the mysterious short film was reportedly complete. Stored securely in HYBE's archives, it was labeled simply JKJam_confession_final.mov. Its runtime, according to one insider, was 21 minutes, a mirror to the years they had known each other. "It ends where it begins," the insider said, "with a song and silence." Though the film was never made public, whispers about its private screening spread. A small viewing was allegedly held for select staff, sound engineers, directors, and close friends. Those who attended described leaving the room in tears. "It wasn't about romance," one said. "It was about love in its purest, most painful form, the kind that doesn't need to be defined to be real." Afterward, both of them retreated again into their own creative worlds. Jungkook poured himself into recording, while Jimin traveled briefly to Paris for a fashion engagement. Yet, across continents, their connection lingered like a heartbeat beneath the surface. On June 13th, the anniversary of BTS's debut, fans noticed something subtle. During Jungkook's Weverse post thanking ARMY, the last line read, "To those who stayed through everything, you are the reason I sing." Hours later, Jimin posted a photo of a single white rose with the caption, "To the one who still sings." No tags, no explanations, just two messages that completed each other like verses from the same unfinished song. Music critics began to pick up on something, too. In both their new works, there was a recurring theme of silence, distance, and faith, not religious, but emotional faith. The belief that someone, somewhere, still remembers. When Jungkook released his digital single months later, fans were quick to decode its hidden layer. The bridge carried a whisper, faint but deliberate, almost like another voice humming beneath his. Some claimed it was Jimin's harmony, uncredited, unannounced, but unmistakable. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. What mattered was that the song, titled "The Quiet Between Us," existed at all. The music video was minimal: a room, a notebook, a flickering candle. And at the very end, before the screen faded to black, a handwritten message appeared. "Some confessions are not meant to be heard, only felt." That line became a mantra among fans, a way to describe the bond that words could never quite capture. As autumn returned to Seoul, both Jimin and Jungkook appeared at an industry event, their first public appearance together in months. They sat side by side, smiling for photos, laughing quietly between interviews. To anyone else, it was ordinary. But for those who had followed every heartbeat of their hidden story, it felt like closure, or maybe the promise that the story would never truly end. Later that night, when the cameras were gone and the city slept, a faint light glowed from the HYB studio. Inside, Jungkook sat by the mixing console, headphones resting around his neck. On the screen before him, a single file blinked open. To the one who stayed _master.wave. He pressed play. A piano melody filled the room, slow, tender, familiar. Then, Jimin's voice, fragile yet steady, floated through the speakers. You once said love is quiet. I think you were right. Because even when it ends, it still echoes through the night. Jungkook closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. He didn't cry. He just listened, the way one listens to a memory too beautiful to let go. Outside, Seoul shimmered beneath the soft rain, and somewhere across the city, perhaps in another studio, Jimin might have been listening too. The distance between them was no longer a wall. It was a bridge built from music, trust, and everything they never had to explain. The confession, after all, had never been about words. It was about understanding. About two hearts that spoke a language no one else needed to translate. And as the final notes of the song faded into silence, the world continued to spin, unaware that somewhere, between the pulse of neon and rain, love was still being sung in the quietest way imaginable.